Let's go beyond the connection. Welcome to the podcast today. We're going to talk about some really interesting things that are happening in the construction industry and how technology is directly impacting everything from operations and efficiencies all the way through the bottom line, and how it's just fundamentally changing the modern worksite today, and that wireless backbone and modern construction data in our networks, they are intertwined. They cannot be separated, and the importance cannot be underscored more. We have on Thomas Berrington. Now, Thomas, you're the Chief Information Officer for French Brothers Homes, and you've got a background not only in home construction, but the restaurant industry, and you've got a background in operations as well as technology. You're a Canadian living in the United States, big Maple Leafs fan. But here's what I'd love to do. I'd love to give you maybe a little bit more time just to explain about your background and the kind of the role and your background in operations and maybe why that's important these days before we get started here.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like you mentioned, Canadian, migrated down to the States, came to school at New Mexico State University, and was really into operations, was in the restaurant industry as a restaurant partner and operations partner. From there, decided that as I was getting into POS development and looking for operational efficiencies in the way we were driving our customers, I fell in love with technology, decided to go back for my MBA and really focus on the information systems side of things. While I was finishing my degree, came on board with French Brothers as a data analyst and have worked with them and moved up within the company up to the Chief Information Officer role. And it's just been a great journey. I personally love the technology. I love integrating technology and operations. The two of them are really so intertwined. Data is such an integral part of operations these days. So having that understanding of what lean operations and how to drive efficient operations, how that has an impact on the bottom line for a business, really drives what technology initiatives need to be prioritized and allows for growth within the business.
I got to tell you, you're well positioned with a technology operations background, a data background, and I want to start talking about that in just a minute here, and your MBA, because everything that we do has to be tied to overall growth of the business, key KPIs of the business. We have to understand how to have business speak. So when we're talking to the owners of the business, other chief executive officers in the business, that you're actually talking their language, because you can't always talk to a CEO or a CFO as a pure technologist. Their interests are about what we're doing and how it's going to impact overall the business. Their KPIs, their metrics, what's important to them is going to be different than typically what we have in operations or in technology or marketing or sales. And having that ability to talk and to basically relate what you're doing to the business and how it's going to make an impact, I just wanted to underscore how important that is in your background. But you talked about coming in as data and data operations. And so you and I in our last conversation talked about not only the importance of data today, but owning the data and why that's important. So I'd love to start out with your point of view on that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's been a big focus for French Brothers. Me coming on with the organization, really having that mentality of the importance of data ownership. It allows us to break down the silos of legacy systems or fragmented systems. Having that ownership, if we want to leverage certain data points into an AI system, or if we want to reference them against analytical components for forecasting, having the data at our fingertips and having that ownership really allows us to make those data-driven decisions, and connecting all of our different systems together through that data ownership really has such a big impact. Otherwise, you're working in such a siloed environment. It's hard to get a holistic picture of business health.
You mentioned within there AI. If you were to go to ChatGPT today and just put in why are businesses not leveraging AI to the way that they can, or why are they using it incorrectly, I think is the way I typed it in. And fragmented, siloed data was number 2 on the list. That's how important it is. We all know garbage in, garbage out, not only for data or for AI, but just decision making in general. And you talked about leveraging it for operations efficiency. Talk to me a little bit about how you think a real data strategy that sounds like you were at the foundational level for making sure happened within the company, how that has impacted operational efficiency.
So it really connects a lot of our data together, and it allows us to begin to leverage historical data we have to make those more accurate forecasts for our business planning, for accurate projections in terms of land commitments and business projections. So looking at all of our operational data, having it available in real time and analyzed at that real time level allows our decision making to be that much more impactful.
When you talk about a communication, we talked about this. You said we've got our own people, we've got tools, we've got our partners, we've got legacy systems, we've got multiple different companies that are being brought together as the trade partners and operating in any one construction site. How important is the data and the network and the availability to helping foster communication to drive those efficiencies?
I think it's absolutely critical. A lot of people think we're a home builder, and really I look at it as we're a project manager. We're really not building the home. We have a phenomenal trade base that's doing the framing, the plumbing, the foundation, all the roofing. They're doing all of the actual building of the home. So our job is really to use all of those data points and bring them together to manage that project, manage the completion of that home building. That entails making sure that we have all the data on task completion and quality assessments, then communicating all of that data to all of the city permitting officials, to all of our future trade partners and subsequent tasks, as well as ultimately to the customer so that they know where that progress is. And then internally, making sure that our team is aware of any roadblocks within that project or if it's ahead of schedule and that we can push deliveries ahead. All of that is so critical on having a real-time understanding of the data for that particular project and then aggregating that and scaling it up for the entire business.
If you wouldn't mind, because like in any business, on time and on budget is important. In the construction industry is really important. If you're not on schedule, you could have whole teams that were scheduled that are sitting idle, that you lose capacity for that team if it delays because they're allocated those partners that you're talking about in the trade. They've got a number of different projects they're working on a lot and everything. Just give us an idea of why on time and on budget is so important in construction so we can appreciate what you're just saying here.
Yeah, I mean, in simple numbers, it's thousands of dollars a day in construction. And this is in residential construction. Commercial, those projects tend to just have larger budgets and higher costs on the daily cost overrun. But when you're looking at home building, there's financing costs, there's getting everything delivered on time. If closing's delayed, there can be costs associated to that homeowner. Having everything pushed, particularly in our building environment, there's not abundance of trades. So if a trade partner gets pushed, it may not be pushed back to the next day. It may get pushed back to the following week. So a single day delay can snowball very quickly in the industry if there's not an abundance of trades, and that's something the industry is facing right now.
One of the things that we talked about before, and it was just amazing. You gave me a stat that I want you to repeat, but you said it used to be that you could have your builders, you could have your managers manage basically like 5 to 10 homes at a time. And what are you up to today? That's a real example because you say we're really project managers. We're ultimately building homes, but you're a project management layer. How has the ability to manage projects changed? Because I don't think I just did it good justice as I was asking this question.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. As a builder, we've gone from managing 5 to 10 homes per builder just based on paper copies and the administrative time to go back to the office and make sure they have all the documentation to now being a cloud-based business and relying solely on iPads, or builders are handling 15 to 20 homes at a time within WIP because it's that much easier to see from the field where they're at, given that connectivity and that cloud connected data to be able to see where each home is at, which home has trades in it, which trades are finishing tasks that they may need to follow up on and do quality walks with the trades. So it allows them to have a much greater insight into the work that needs to be done that day and operational efficiency versus having a hub and spoke mentality where they went to the central office, got all their information, and then went back and forth to each project to get the documents or to get the tasks and fill in dispatch and everything else.
So it allows your people to be out in the team or in the field managing these projects where they need to be, where they have the biggest impact. And managing 5 to 10 homes versus 15 to 20 homes at a time, that's phenomenal. The impact on the bottom line profitability of the business, I'm sure, is absolutely phenomenal. So I just wanted to underscore how important, because every business talks about we need better operational efficiencies. But when you can have that kind of an impact on the business, that's in the game changer category. That's an impact on the growth of the business, what you can manage, how profitably you can manage it without divulging. And I don't want you to divulge any numbers or anything, but how would you characterize the impact on the business from, say, 10 years ago or whenever it was that you were managing 5 to 10 homes versus per builder now 15 to 20 homes at a time? How would you characterize for us in a way that we could understand the impact on the business that makes?
So, really simply, we've closed the same number of homes this year as we did a few years back with half the staff. A significant portion of that is from a reduction in administrative cost in the office, not having as many administrative people, and then also having our builders have the ability to take on a larger workload and that many more projects under WIP at a time because they can manage significantly more homes from the field versus having to come to the office. And we see with very minimal additional staffing, we're looking to close 25% more homes with very few additional headcount added to our staff.
Well, I know in the construction industry overall, so I'm not talking about French Brothers in particular, the industry runs on, everybody likes to say, paper thin margins. So when you can reduce by 50% the amount of manpower it takes to build the same amount of homes or just a limited more manpower to get 20% more homes created, that's huge. So I just wanted to make sure that we were spending the right amount of time, because if we don't put into context the importance of what we're talking about here, then it's hard to understand why we should be thinking about it so much. And the folks that are listening here today, this is the kind of thing, if you're a chief information officer, director of IT at your business, these are the kind of things that you want to be able to take into and show your executive management, share with the rest of the executive team on what kind of impacts you can make on the business. So the idea here is I want to talk about the leadership capacity, and you termed it as data-driven leadership. And what that means, what you were talking about there, that is now enabled through the kind of data, the kind of efficiencies, the kind of access, like you said, on an iPad, out in the field. When you said data-driven, the rise of data-driven leadership, what did you mean by that?
So it's really removing the emotion from a lot of the decisions within business. And I think that particularly in the construction industry, which is one that tends to kind of lag behind in technology innovation, a lot of decisions tend to be emotion based. And we're building this because that's the home that I want to build, or we feel it represents us as a builder. And a lot of times it's let's look at the numbers, let's look at what the need is. There is a need for affordable homes within the US and particularly within our region. So it's more important to build based on that data than to build on the emotion and to go build a lavish home that has all these fixtures and we're emotionally attached to. That may not be what works for the environment right now. So using the data to here's what we need to build, here's the price point we need to achieve, and let's build a home that the majority of people can afford to build. Starting with that data-driven approach allows us to design homes appropriately for consumers. We can still build a quality home, but we're building it to data specifications. And it's really allowed us, it goes all the way to even looking at options. We always want a fireplace in because we like homes with fireplace. Well, when we have homes that customers are building for themselves, if 90% of the times, if they're not selecting the fireplace, why do we always force it down? Maybe that's not an important option. Maybe we can help the customer with affordability by removing that fireplace because it's not something that they deem valuable. So it's really just looking at all of the data we have available to us to make sure that we're providing the best options.
You brought up the idea of data and interfacing with customers and learning from the voice of your customer, basically. One of the biggest differentiators in any industry today is the customer experience that is created. And so you and I didn't really talk about this before, but I'd love to get your thoughts on how does access to this data, real time, live, in the field, everything we've been talking about here, how does it impact the experience the customer is going through and improving that customer experience? Because that's a big competitive advantage.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's something that the home building industry as a whole has really improved on in the last few years. I related a lot to the car buying experience. I think car buying has traditionally been a little bit further along than the home buying, but you've had the ability to select the car, choose all your colors, add the options, and really do all of that from your couch or from your home and make all of those selections. Obviously, from the back end, the manufacturers are then able to see what selections make the most desirable car. From a home building industry, that's something that we've just started doing in the last few years of having the ability to have kind of 3D visualizations of plan sets and what adding a third car garage will actually look like to that home. Or once you make all your color selections, having those 3D renderings of here's what it's going to look like and to create that emotional attachment to the home, but also to create a more seamless buying experience because it's really hard to make what's typically the biggest investment in most people's lives off of small paint chips and little sample door colors and stuff like that. But having that visualized in a digital environment or something that they can print off in PDF really creates that seamless customer experience where they don't have to come in, they can do it on their own time, but they can still create that emotional attachment. And then we're able to capture that data. So when they do come in, we already have that background knowledge on what they may be looking for.
I want to transition back a little bit to what we were talking about earlier. You mentioned the iPad, and we had a big part of our conversation leading up to this was about the wireless job site and why mobility is the new normal and why it's the core infrastructure like wireless for modern construction today. How would you explain that to the folks that are listening right now?
Yeah, I think the construction industry is critical for mobile technology. It's one of the few industries where we're constantly on the move. If you're in the same place too long, you're dying as a construction business because you're not building anything. It's already been built. Particularly for us as a home builder in southern New Mexico and in West Texas, we're not redeveloping plats of land. We're really Wild West and developing barren land where there's not a lot of pre-established utilities or network connectivity. So having all of that, there's not a way to set up shop and connect to the wireless router or anything without having a developed cellular network or network connectivity. It prohibits us from using those iPads and completing all the stuff that we've been talking about in terms of scheduling and real-time data and everything else.
So I know that you think as the CIO all the time about your network and the reality of what happens with downtime. So first, I'd love to just ask about what does downtime mean to you? What's the impact of downtime? And then we could talk a little bit about how you prevent downtime and how you're thinking about in a wireless first networking strategy. How do you ensure resiliency on the network and things like that? But first, what's the impact when the network goes down?
Yeah, absolutely. Looking at it as a project management company from the field, when that comes down, it eliminates our ability to communicate the completion of tasks and where that project is. So it eliminates getting that inbound feedback from our builders and from our construction managers about what's going on within the field. And then vice versa, if anything happens at our kind of centralized offices, it prevents us from being able to communicate outwards, whether that be to our trade partners on scheduled delays or incomplete deliveries or anything else that we need to communicate with our trade partners for. It impairs our business at the central location. And then from a communication standpoint, it inhibits our field personnel from communicating what's going on with their projects.
Lots of times you can feel the impact by how many complaints you get. Hey, the network's down. What's coming up? What happens in the field when the network goes down? Is everybody kind of like, I'm kind of going along. We'll get over it and then we'll catch up in an hour whenever it comes back up? Or are you immediately getting calls in from the field? Like, how important is it from their perspective?
Yeah, for them, typically it's fairly important. Obviously, most of the stuff is scheduled, so there's not a lot of live data in terms of an Internet of Things manufacturing type mentality. But what we find happens is this whipsaw effect where there should be a steady stream of communication. Hey, the trade partners are here. For tomorrow, we need these ones. For the next day, we have these. The previous day ones were complete, and it should be a steady flow of data. If networks go down or we lose connectivity with any of our builders, there's this whipsaw where there's a lack of communication for a period until they get back on the network. And then all of a sudden we're getting a stream of updates where all of this stuff has either been completed or certain tasks weren't done. But now we've kind of lost that window to be able to update the successive trades to be aware of what still needs to be completed. So it creates this whipsaw effect within the production pipeline.
Okay, so now I'm going to flip to the other side of the question that I asked there, which is the buck stops with you in terms of network resilience. So how do you think about a reliable, resilient network that doesn't go down? And when it does, there's failover mechanisms and all of that. How do you think about that today? And is the technology progress? Because you're talking about wireless. And to tell you the truth, there's still a lot of people out there that are like, I need the wired connection. I just can't rely on wireless. And that's yesterday's thinking. How do you frame a wireless first network infrastructure? Because you're forced into it. You have to live with it. But in terms of reliability, you can't live in a wired world there. So how do you think about it? And how has the wireless first strategy worked for you?
Yeah, so it's really on the key points that I look at are the resiliency of it, and then just the connectivity or the failover of the network itself. So as well as latency. We obviously want a very low latency and really high resiliency. One of the things our kind of mainline network when we're in the field is relying on cellular networks. We just do a data allowance and we have all of our field personnel on their different cell networks. That provides a mixed basket approach where not everybody is necessarily on the same network. So if one of the major carriers goes down, we may have somebody else in the field that's on a different network not experiencing issues. But in the event that we lose entire cellular connectivity, one of the things we started looking at in terms of wireless is the other popular one would be cellular, satellite, and looking at satellite connectivity either through Starlink or some of the new ones that are being launched. And then it's the latency is slightly worse on that. So I wouldn't rely on that as here's our first one. But the resiliency on that, there tends to be very little aside from bad weather. And luckily, we don't experience too much of that. So having that two-prong approach for field personnel works really well. From an office, we're still looking at that latency and relying on fiber. In the event that fiber goes down, that's where we revert back to our cellular connection and looking at a 5G hotspot style connection for our office. We haven't gone to triple redundancy, but in the event that we were ever relying on our cellular, then we would develop a plan to start looking at, well, we probably need that cellular redundancy backup just in case we lose 2 of 3.
So you have mentioned a couple of times here in the conversation that you're cloud-based. The apps that you use to run the business are cloud-based. Is there any impact or concern you have running these cloud apps that run the business on a wireless first network?
So we haven't experienced any issues. And looking at it, obviously, there's kind of surface of attack issues. Having that wireless being based on the Microsoft cloud and relying on kind of their Entra security protections and role-based access and zero trust architecture, we feel secure enough and risk adverse enough to meet our business operations and business plan.
In other words, you've got bigger fish, you got other priorities to think about. That's not something you have to worry about.
Yeah, wait a minute. I don't think we're a prime target now with AI. It's less about who the target is and just blanket attacks. But with that, we feel as long as we have role based access and identity access management implemented from the kind of app architecture standpoint, then access to our data should be secured.
So I've got one last question to ask you, Thomas, and that's we've just talked about so much here that our poor human brains can only retain about two or three things at a time. But if for the audience that is watching today, and we're in the middle of a series on the digital job site, so there's a lot of construction technology folks that are watching. What's the one thing that if you said, there's one thing I want everyone to take away from our conversation here today, what would that one thing be?
I think it'd be the importance in the role data plays for an organization's operations. Data is so critically important to modern day operations, and organizations that understand that and have roles leveraged against it, whether it be a CIO or technology manager or somebody who's leveraged against making your data as efficient as possible and as connected as possible, and maintaining that connectivity is so important to being able to scale in today's business environment.
Here's one thing I know. People are going to have questions. Would it be appropriate if I gave out a link to your LinkedIn profile that if people had questions, they could reach out to you?
Yeah, absolutely. We're very open as a builder. We love to do demos on some of the app development we've done, a lot of the reporting stuff, and we've worked with builders coast to coast. We're also actively speaking at a lot of the conferences going on. So French Brothers is very much industry promoter.
Well, great. The mission of this podcast is to bring all of our different insights and perspectives and experiences and industry knowledge together so that as technologists and data and networking experts, we can learn from each other. And if we do that, that's the rising tide that lifts all boats. And I just want to say thank you because I think you did a phenomenal job as being a part of that rising tide today.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me on. I really appreciate the opportunity. It's great what you guys are putting together, giving a voice to the technology voices within construction.